Good morning, Philippines! Good morning, world! Welcome to Impromptu Bulletin Virtual Talk Show! Our topic for today will be all about the Philippine history of journalism. The early Philippine newspapers played a critical role in quest of our nation's freedom and independence. Thus, the pantheon of our national heroes includes journalists such as Jose Rizal, Graciano Lopez Haina, Mariano Ponce, Antonio Luna, to name a few. Now, let's dig deeper to the history of Philippine journalism. As we all know, the Philippine press is known to be the liveliest and freest in Asia because of the libertarian free enterprise principles institutionalized by the American colonizers. But has it always been the case? Now, let's welcome our first guest this morning, one of the top broadcast journalists in the Philippines, to walk us through the initial pages of the Philippine press, Miss Mary Christy Sorilla. Can someone take us to the initial pages of the Philippine press? Yes, Miss Sorilla.
Thank you, Sok. The first Philippine newspaper, the Superior Gobierno, was established in 1811 with the Spanish governor general himself as editor. The content was primarily new from Spain because the intended readers were the local Spaniards.
Miss Sorilla, why do you think that this newspaper was intended for the local Spaniards?
Thank you, Sok. It was intended for the local Spaniards to satisfy their need for the latest developments in Spain and the rest of Europe.
Ah, I see. Now, to share her insights about La Esperanza, please help me welcome the Editor-in-Chief of Pilipinas Daily Bulletin, Miss Rica Joy Bacala. Miss Rica Joy, can you share anything about La Esperanza?
La Esperanza is the first daily newspaper published in 1846. It dealt with non-controversial subjects such as religion, science, and history. It also catered the Spanish elite. The best edited newspaper, Diario de Manila, was suppressed by the Governor-General after 38 years of publication.
Why was that so?
It was allegedly for inciting the Filipinos to rebel against Spaniards. Meanwhile, the first local publication was El Ilocano, which was published in 1893, and the first publication for and by women, which is the El Hogar, was also published in 1893.
The history of free press in the Philippines has its roots in nationalistic newspapers published in Europe and in the Philippines during the Spanish colonial rule. What were they aiming for? Now, to answer that question, let's welcome our next guest this morning, the owner of Ladrera's Publishing Company, Miss Ingrid Ladrera.
The aim was to raise the level of consciousness with respect to the oppressive conditions prevailing in the country then. These newspapers were published and written by the so-called Ilustrados.
I see.
Foremost among the nationalistic newspapers was La Solidaridad, the mouthpiece of the revolution and the fortnightly organ of propaganda movement. Published in Spain, and it first appeared in the year 1889 with the policy to work peacefully for social and economic reforms and to expose real plight of the Philippines and to champion liberalism and democracy. Other newspapers which advocated for political reforms included Kalayaan, Liberty, the only issue of which was published in the year 1898, Kalayaan served as the official organ of the revolutionaries. La Independencia, 1898, was the most widely read newspapers of the revolution. Other newspapers were La Libertad, 1898, and El Heraldo de Iloilo, 1898.
The use of the power of the pen by the early heroes proves the feasibility of using nonviolent strategies for social and political reforms. A lesson well imbibed by Filipino journalists even today. To share his insights, please help me welcome our next guest for this morning, social media specialist and freelance digital journalist, Mr. Mizak Galsiran.
I may add, the American Legion saw the introduction of a new newspaper published mostly by the American journalists. The Manila Time in 1898, the Bounding Below, and the Official Gazette 1898, Manila Daily Bulletin in 1900s, and the Philippine Free Press in 1908. Some of these publications are still with us today. In 1920, the Philippines Herald, a pro-Filipino newspaper, came out.
Yes, some of these publications are still with us today. Now, for our last guest, please help me welcome Senior Digital Marketing of PH Virtual Hub, Ms. Maria Rowena Salise.
Correct, Sophia. Another nationalistic newspaper during the period did not last long due to American suppression. Among these were El Nuevo Dia, The New Day, published in Cebu, and El Renacimiento. But the most popular among the massa were the Tagalog newspaper Sakdal, which attacked regressive taxes, big government, and abusive capitalists and landlords. Issues which remain relevant today. When the World War II broke out, all publications except those used by the Japanese were disbanded. Only the Manila Tribune, Taliba, and La Vergüenza were allowed to publish under regular censorship by the Japanese Imperial Army. However, Filipinos during the period were not left without an alternative media, underground newspapers, mostly typewritten or mimeograph, proliferated to provide the people with counter-information.
What an intense start of discussion about the Philippine journalism history. Let's pause for a short break, and when we come back, let's walk through the golden age of Philippine journalism.
Nameplate is a newspaper name printed in special type on the front page, as called masthead. But newspaper is a cat. Cat is a photo or illustration.
The post-war era to pre-martial law period, 1945-1972, is called the golden age of Philippine journalism. Now please, walk us through it. Miss Aurelia.
The Philippine Press began to be known as the Press in Asia in 1945 to 1972. During that time, the press functioned as real watchdog of the government. It was sensitive to national issues and critical of the government. Mistakes and abuses among its practitioners were crude and scholarly, noble-minded writers and editors. Paolo Mendez, Artemio Lacson, Modesto Carolan, Leon Guerrero, Amando Malay, Ifi, Lopez, Recibo Testa, to name a few. The press during the period was forced into a marriage of convenience with large business enterprises and political groups. Most of the newspaper were wholly or partly owned by large business complexes. Some newspapers had control and interest in other media, particularly radio and television. In 1952, the National Press Club was organized to promote cooperation among journalists and uphold press freedom and the dignity of journalists. In 1964, the Philippine Press Institute, or PPI, was organized to foster the development and improvement of journalists in the country.
Oh, the so-called marriage of convenience happened during this time, then followed by the Marcos years, controlled an alternative press, right?
Yes, Sophia. When martial law was declared on September 21, 1972, the first order issued by the late President Ferdinand E. Marcos was the takeover and control of all the privately owned newspapers, magazines, radio and television facilities, and all other media communications. Editors and journalists were the first to be arrested and incarcerated in military prison camps. Of the pre-martial law papers, only the Daily Express and Bulletin were allowed to reopen. A new newspaper, which is called Times Journal, was allowed to open after 1 month of proclamation. These newspapers were then called or were known as establishment press. As expected, the press during the martial law period was highly controlled. Almost overnight, the print media changed its traditional adversary relationship with the government to that of cooperation. Many journalists learned to practice brinkmanship and even self-censorship in order to survive or avoid direct confrontation with the regime.
Interesting. Was there any counter-propaganda happened?
Yes, of course. To counter propaganda churned out by the pro-government private media and the government's own media infrastructure, and the so-called alternative press emerged in the 1980s. These were a handful of tabloid newspapers and some radio stations which defied government instructions on how to handle news stories, despite constant harassment and intimidations. Among these publications and the people behind them were the father and son team, Jose Burgos, who were behind the courageous tabloid We Forum and its broadsheet affiliate, Pahayagang Malaya. Felix Bautista and Melinda Q. De Jesus edited Veritas. Raul and Leticia Locsin published Business Day, Now Business World. Eugenia D. Apostol and Leticia J. Magsano published and edited Inquirer and Mr. and Miss Magazine.
In addition to alternative press, the people also opted for Zamizdat or Xerox journalism. These were news clippings, mostly from the foreign publications, censored for mass dissemination by the regime, which provide an accurate reading of developments in the country. Many of these articles were written by Filipino working for the foreign newspapers.
Moreover, women journalists proved to be equally, if not more daring than men in their writing. Even the emergence of the alternative press came about essentially through efforts of women editors and journalists. Several women journalists were subjected to harassment, threats, and intimidation by the military. Among these, courageous women journalists were Eugenia D. Apostol, Betty Gubelmonte, Letty Magsano, Arlene Baptist, Ninis Cacho Olivares, Domino Torrevillas, Melinda De Jesus, Tena Monzon Palma, Malu Mangahas, Sheila Coronel, and Ceres Duyo. Among the outstanding heroes during the struggle against the Marcos regime was Joaquin Chino Roses, publisher of the pre-martial law, the Manila Times, and regarded as the grand old man of Philippines journalism.
The discussions are getting more exciting. Time for a short break, and up next, we will be talking about newspapers today, a press in transition.
The third part of a newspaper is called headline. Headline is a title given to a story. The next part of a newspaper is lead. The first sentences of a news story informing the reader of who, where, what, when, and sometimes how and why is called lead.
Welcome back. Now, let's proceed to newspaper today, a press in transition. Please correct me if I'm wrong. There are a total of 14 national daily broadsheets and 19 tabloids published in Metro Manila. The combined circulation of these newspapers is estimated to be only about 7 million, including pass on readership in a country of almost 75 million.
That's correct, Sophia. And on the 14 broadsheets, only 2 are in Filipino, Kabayan and Numero Uno. Among the newspapers with the biggest claimed daily circulation are Manila Bulletin, 280,000 on weekdays and 300,000 on Sundays. Philippine Daily Inquirer, 260,000 and 280,000 respectively, and Philippine Star, 271,687. Tabloids, with the average cost of half the broadsheets, enjoy a higher circulation and seem to be preferred by the C, D, E income brackets. Tabloids are written in Taglish, a combination of English and Filipino, and have entertainment slant. The most popular tabloid is Abante, with claimed circulation of 417,600. Another favorite is People's Journal, with claimed circulation of 382,000.
True. There are also 5 Chinese broadsheets, all published in Binondo, or what we call the Manila's Chinatown. This includes Universal Daily News, China Times, United Daily News, World News, and Chinese Commercial News. Enjoying a revival are the provincial newspapers. The 1998 Media Fact Book reported that there are now 408 provincial publications nationwide. Of these number, 30 of which is the daily publications, while 292 of which is 292 of which come out weekly, and the rest are for either monthly or quarterly publications. In the 1980s, there are less than 10 provincial publications, which is located in the key cities. The immediate readership of the provincial newspapers is about 2,000 subscribers for each of the publications. Assuming that each of those subscribers passes on the newspaper at least one person, there are 1 million of Filipinos who is reached by the provincial dailies.
An important trend is the emergence of a chain of provincial newspapers nationwide owned by a single corporation. An example is the Sunstar dailies found in the major cities nationwide such as Baguio, Angeles, Cebu, Iloilo, Dumaguete, Cagayan de Oro, and Davao. Most of these provincial papers were existing but not viable when bought by the Sunstar. The acquisition has enabled a new owners to infuse additional capital, acquire new printing equipment and facilities, and hire more editorial staff. The result is significant improvement in the editorial quality of most of these newspapers. Some provincial dailies can now compete with so-called national or Metro Manila-based dailies in terms of editorial quality. But the most popular reading fare in the country is still the illustrated comics. The Media Fact book reported 46 comics titles published either weekly or twice a week. Most of these features drama, love story, and horror. Among the popular ones are Aliwan, Love Life, Beloved, True Horror, True Ghost, Shocker, and Halimaw. Another popular reading fare are the magazines. Of the 38 magazines listed in the Media Fact book, almost half are movie, fan magazines such as Gazette, Glitter, Islap, Hot Copy, Rumors, and Movie Stars.
Ah, the comics! Those were the days! What's the good news?
Perhaps it gives priority on the watchdog function. Newspaper contents to be dominated by the government issues and events, inevitably involving government officials aka politicians. Officials often criticize newspapers for inaccurate and sloppy reporting, and even having hidden agendas leading to a filing of multi-million libel cases against the editorial journalist. One major daily experience advertising pulled out by advertisers sympathetic to top national officials who feel aggrieved by the negative coverage he gets from the newspaper. The press regard negative reportage as part of their watchdog function and consider libel suits as serious threats to press freedom. Newspaper pages serve as effective forum for dialogue on national and local issues. Constitutional amendments or chacha, visiting force agreement, death penalty, among others. It has succeeded in ventilating local issues into national consequences or consciousness as the agrarian problem for farmers from Sumilao and other places. Other good news in the increasing numbers of investigative stories focusing on diverse issues, grand and corrupted in government and business, environment, human rights, agrarian and urban land reform, and the Marcos hidden wealth. Many of these articles had led to investigations by Congress, other appropriate government agencies. Investigative stories have significance enhanced transparency and governance, and many more.
Business and economics are given adequate coverage and research. Many major depositories are given front page statement, while business section of most newspapers have been expanded both in terms of additional features and topics. These depositories are not only limited to new but now carry features, including personality, in-depth articles, and some newspapers even incorporate gossip. Likewise, there have been significant improvements in the coverage of science and technology, agriculture, education, health, and similar topics. Many newspapers provide at least a page or section on this topic once a week. The major dailies now have a quick information technology or IT page. Although our so-called national dailies are still Manila-centric in terms of content, there are now serious efforts to feature verse, stories from the regions beyond the traditional natural and man-made calamities. Section or pages are devoted to human stories from various regions of Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao.
If our pages have improved in terms of their contents and appearances, this can be partly attributed to continuing efforts of professionalism in the industry. These efforts can come from the professional organizations and the academe. The Philippine Press Institute conducts about a dozen training courses each year on various aspects of newspaper publication, editorial, management, and ethics. It also sponsors the annual Community Press Awards, which recognizes excellence among provincial newspapers. The Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility focuses on the upgrading of professionalism and responsibility of media workers through workshops and publications. In addition to offering graduate degrees in journalism and communication management, the Asian Institute of Journalism and Communication conducts short-term training, media research, policy advocacy, and publications.
There are over 100 communication departments or colleges nationwide which provide a ready source for media practitioners. However, the quality of their curriculum and therefore their graduates will need improvement. A task which required partnership and support from the industry itself.
So, we have learned up until the good news of the Philippine history of journalism. When we come back, we will be talking more about the other side, which is the bad news. Stay tuned!
The next part of a newspaper is a jump line. What is a jump line? It is a directional line of print at the end of the very first part of a divided story of an article or a newspaper. For example, in this article, you can see a line that says, "See Security, page 8A." That means that the continuation of this story is in the Security page 8A. Another example. As you can see in this page, below the title, you can see a line that says, "Continued from page 1." So that means that this article is just a continuation of the article from page 1. So there, that is the meaning of a jump line of a newspaper. Graphics. Graphics is a combination of artworks and words which helps to visually explain a story. For example, therefore, graphics present information in a more concise and creative way. So that is graphics.
Catline. It is a descriptive information appearing with a piece of art. It is also called caption. Index. It is an alphabetized table of content of the newspaper.
Now, we're back. After hearing the good news, let's all hear about some bad news of the Philippine history of journalism. What's a common complaint against the press?
A common complaint against the press is its alleged tendency to sensationalize and to focus on or permanent conflict situation. Sensationalism is defined as exaggerating and non-issues, events, or minor one so as to create startling scandalous effects. It says that the press resorts to this unwritten editorial policy in order to sell or increase circulations, and of course, attract more advertisers.
True. A related concern is the lack of follow-up stories. Newspapers and media in general do not display the same tenacity that can uncover a Watergate scandal. Journalists have such short memories that there is a little or no follow-up through or heretofore major stories. Journalists themselves acknowledge that one of their serious problems is environmental journalism, practiced by some of their colleagues. This refers to envelopes with some money distributed to journalists in return for a favor. A positive media coverage or an end to negative publicity, some unscrupulous journalists have shifted to ATM cards to make the transaction less obvious. The Philippine Press Institute, or PPI, has adopted the Journalist Code of Ethics. The code provides, among others, that journalists must adhere to scrupulous reporting or interpretation of news, not to suppress essential facts or distort the trust by improper omission or emphasis. But adherence to the code is voluntary and at best imposed through ombudsman and press council system. There is a need to improve the mechanism for both.
Yes, other issues often raised focused on the quality of newspaper coverage on the specific sectors: women, children, cultural communities, and among others. Women and child rights advocates have noted a significant increase in the coverage of the women and children issues over the past decade. While this has succeeded in integrating such issues in the mainstream of national agenda, they also lament the tendency of the mass media, or including the newspapers, to prefer stories that easily lend to sensational and controversial slant, may it be child abuse, prostitution, child labor, and other similar issues. On the other hand, equally important but less controversial stories on malnutrition, lack of access of preschool, primary health care still needs a wider and more sustained coverage.
Also, a related concern is the quality of coverage in women as they are portrayed as weaker victims. This object tabloids have been singled out for splashing scantily dress. Starlets into provocative photos in their front pages as a marketing strategy. The state of poverty and dignity of women and children have often been raised, especially in abuse cases. A guideline on the coverage of crimes against women and minors prepared by the Center of Media Freedom and Responsibility has been distributed to newspapers to help ensure a more sensitive. Newspapers supporting likewise the Department of Justice prepared a guideline for media coverage of children.
Though regional news stories have increased, media coverage of the country's 120 ethnic groups and cultural communities are still wanting. The limited coverage tends to focus on conflict situations, calamities, drought, and hunger. Stories about their way of life, although there is a continuing attempt at preservation of their dances, songs, and ethnographic materials, the more visible cultural communities like the Igorots and various Muslim tribes are more apt to be stereotyped.
Stereotyping still exists in the computer age. It's a sad truth. Speaking of computer age, what are the challenges for the print media? But Before giving your answers, let's take another short break. Stay tuned!
The next part is the byline, with the name of a writer appearing above the article. And next is the photo credit, the reference to a source of a photograph.
The last part of the newspaper is deck, a secondary headline which provides additional information about the story. Deck. Now, we are back. The hanging question was, what are the challenges for the print media in this computer age? How are newspapers coping with the advent of new information technology?
Most of our national dailies have integrated computers in their operations. Some are now automated, from news sourcing and gathering, editing, layout, and design to production. Among the highly automated newspapers are Business World, Philippine Daily Inquirer, Manila Bulletin. Most of the daily newspapers are also online, reaching even people who would not normally read a printed page. Using computers require continuing retooling among editors, journalists, and the production people. Some jobs may eventually have to be phased out as machines take over the work to be done. Some veteran journalists admit difficulty in adjusting as they miss the sounds of the typewriters. But even some new journalism graduates are not fully equipped with the tool of the computer age. Many journalism department or school lack electronic laboratories to prepare their students with desktop editorial skills.
Many provincial newspapers are still in the underwood or remontun to reach only the bigger provincial dailies such as the Sun Star Chain, the Freeman, Visayan Daily Star, to name a few, have access to more advanced technology.
Will newspapers be eventually replaced by television and other new media as main source of news?
Not necessarily. According to the world trends in the newspaper industry, as reported in the National Daily, the report noted that the newspapers have a number of advantages. Number 1, strong relationship with readers and advertisers. 2, high degree of credibility. Online services are regarded not as replacement but as supplement to newspapers. Even the threat of advertisers transferring to another web, it is still quite remote in the Philippines, considering the small population of internet users in the Philippines. It is estimated that our internet-based users is only 80,000, with a possible multiplying factor of 4. This brings the total internet user base of 320,000. However, annual growth rate of internet users is at 30%. But the newspaper industry will continue to compete with television, cable TV, radio, and other media channels for advertising revenue. This would require more creative news, packaging amidst threats of declining readers in favor of the visual media.
We are all rooting for the newspaper to stay for a lifetime. What a great discussion we have. Thank you to our guests who have shared their insights, knowledge about Philippine history of journalism. Before we end our show, please you can promote your advocacies or say thank you to someone. Yes, Miss Aurelia, you can start.
Thank you for having me here and tune into TVJE every night at 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. for the latest news.
To all the patronage of Filipina Daily News, thank you so much. And I would like to also thank Sophia for having me here as well.
It's a pleasure being here today. If you have any publishing needs and the likes, the Adveras Publishing Company, your publishing choice, are here to serve you.
For digital and social media needs, please visit my website at mizakdigitaljournalist.com. And thank you for having me, Miss Sophia. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much. God bless. Goodbye.
For your digital marketing needs, you can contact me at salissimariarowena@phvirtualhub.com. I'm so glad to be part in this show this morning. Thank you!
On behalf of the Impromptu Bulletin Virtual Talk Show team, thank you everyone for being here. To our virtual audience, thank you so much for staying and tuning in. Did you enjoy today's topic? I hope you did. See you next time. Bye-bye.